All right, good morning. How are we doing? Good. It's great to be with you guys. As Josh said, my name is Jake, one of the pastors here. Our lead pastor, Russell, is actually mid-race right now, running a half Ironman. Just another layer to that. I will not be doing that anytime soon, so you can have me whenever you need that. We thought about trying to get the race tracker up on the screen. Couldn't figure out the technology for that, and didn't want you to be too distracted. But they are racing right now, and wishing them all the best. So that's happening for them. This week at VBS, I had the opportunity to be part of the teaching on the third night. I was a Roman officer, and part of that duty was to talk about how I had soldiers that reported to me. And I had this moment of realization as I was doing that. This line hit me. So this is one of the lines of my script here. If I command my soldiers to do something impossible, they won't be able to do it. Now, that might not sound like a very profound statement. You can't do something you can't do, right? But we kind of exist in a society that wants you to try to do things that you can't do all the time and try to do them, all the time and fill your calendar and be so involved in everything. And I think back to this video that I saw. It's probably not that recent anymore, maybe a couple of years ago, but there was this guy that was on a podcast or video or something like that, but he was talking about how you can actually manipulate time and bend it to what you want to. Anybody, this ringing a bell for anybody? No, it's just me. Okay, all right. This is my algorithm, apparently. It's different from yours. But he was like, my first day is from 6 a.m. to noon. And then I start day 2 from noon to 6 p.m. And then day 3 is 6 p.m. to midnight. So I do 3 days for every one of year one. And he's just going off on this rant or whatever, right? And then there's this really funny part where he's like, and you think I'm crazy, but you're crazy for thinking that time still works the same way it did for a caveman 300 years ago. And pretty sure that we're still, sun's still rising and setting at the same time every day. But anyway, point being is that we kind of live in this society where it's especially here in America, where it's, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, make it happen, that you can grind your way to success, or that you can figure it out if you try hard enough, that if you just put enough effort out there, that you can accomplish whatever your dreams are. And there's some truth to that, but there's also this reality that we can't do things we can't do. We can't do things we can't do. And this week, I had this moment of feeling this powerlessness, or there was just this weight of, I can't do everything that I want to do right now. So this week for us, for my family, we were actually moving into our new house. We had VBS in the evenings. I'm trying to do my normal kind of work week during the day, putting together the VBS recap video you just watched, preparing for this sermon as well, being a dad and a husband and a brother and a son, just the normal. And I hit this moment of I cannot do all of this to at least the extent that I want to, that I would like to do this. I want to do it well, and I can't do this. And it was this moment of realization of I have limits. And I would say maybe some of you laugh if you're older than me. I'm 32 now. You asked me this 5-10 years ago, I'd be like, no, I don't have limits. I wouldn't have said that out loud, but maybe that's how I thought about the world. And I don't know if, just getting older has changed my limits, or if I'm just more aware of them. But the realization of I have limits. I can't do this all to the extent that I want it to do. And what's interesting to me as I was preparing for this message and thinking about this is that sometimes as followers of Jesus, you might actually experience this not just in your own physical or emotional or mental limitations, but that actually God feels like he's asking you to do something that feels impossible. There's a calling on your life that you're I don't know how I could possibly do that. I don't know how mentally I can get there, physically I can get there. I don't know what that looks like. Maybe it's a big move or a big job shift or a family change or something like that. Whatever that looks like. But sometimes that moment arises where it's man, not only do I have these physical limitations, but spiritually it feels like God's asking me to do something I'm just not ready to do, or I'm not capable of. And when we hit those moments, thankfully, when we feel this powerlessness, or that we're not adequate enough, God is powerful and he is adequate enough. And on our own, we do have limitations when we're feeling overwhelmed by God, or that our own just life circumstances. To know that he is enough and that he provides for us is a great truth to hold on to. We're going to be talking about a story that kind of embodies this idea today. So if you have your Bible with you, John chapter 6 is where we're going to be. We're going back to the Gospel of John. If you've been with us the last couple of weeks, we've been going through a quick 2-week generosity series. We're back to John this week, and we're going to continue to kind of do that, just kind of derail John, take an exit ramp for kind of some, random sermons, or maybe not random, intentionally, there for those purposes, but then we'll kind of go back to John, and eventually maybe over the next decade or so, we'll make it through the whole book of John, right? Hopefully it'll be faster than that. But yeah, we're going to start in John chapter 6, starting in verse 1, and it says this. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Now, something I find that I just want to jump out right out of the gate with, that I find fascinating about this story is, of all the miracles that Jesus did, there are only 2 miracles that are actually recorded in all 4 of our Gospels. The one is his resurrection, his death, and then raising from the dead. And the second one is the story that we're reading today in the feeding of the 5,000. Now, that to me tells me that there's an importance to this. There's a reason all 4 of the Gospel writers chose this miracle as one that they certainly wanted in their version of the accounts of Jesus' life. And also from that, we can look at the different gospel accounts and kind of gather some different information from them. So in Matthew's telling of this story, we find out that this actually took place on the same day that Jesus found out that his cousin John the Baptist, had just been executed. So he's got some, maybe some family emotional mourning and grief that's weighing on him in this moment. In Mark's gospel, we see that Jesus was actually, him and his disciples were teaching these people throughout the day. So find out in the morning, cousin's been beheaded, and we've got this terrible family trauma and hurt that's going on. Then he's got people that are following him and trying to gain wisdom or think he's a prophet, and they're trying to learn from him and his disciples. He's doing that all day, and he gets to the end of the day. He's probably exhausted. There's probably some grief and mourning that he's been holding back, that he's trying to find a place off on his own to handle and deal with that. And then there's all of this whole crowd of people in front of him. So that's kind of the context of where this is all starting from. Now, this talks about the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. It's kind of an interesting little nugget thrown in here. It's just a nod to the idea that Rome has overtaken this region. And so if you're a Jewish person, you would call this the Sea of Galilee. If you're part of the Roman Empire or a Gentile, this would be the Sea of Tiberias. They've come in, they've occupied, and they've renamed this sea as after one of their rulers. Now, the crowd that was following him, it says that they were doing so because they saw him doing signs on the sick. And who wouldn't want to follow somebody that's doing miraculous things? They're healing people, and just, things are obviously going well, or it seems like if you're around this person, good things are happening. So why don't we just, hang around and see if something good happens to us too? But I think what we're really supposed to see by this indication that they were following him because of the signs he was doing is that they maybe had the wrong intentions or motivations for why they were following Jesus. And we'll actually circle back to this kind of later on in the message, as that's, I think, is confirmed later on in this story. The last thing I'll point out about this section is it says that the Passover was at hand. And this is interesting to me just because if you follow along the story, at the end of chapter 5, Jesus is actually in Jerusalem, where the majority of Jews would go to celebrate the Passover feast. Now he has traveled about 75 miles north to the Sea of Galilee, and yet the Passover feast is at hand. And so he's actually traveled away from Jerusalem, where you have this entire multitude of Jewish people that are actually converging down into Jerusalem. And yet you have this large group of people that are actually following Jesus going kind of the opposite direction. Or maybe they're coming down and kind of they've just met in the middle. I'm not sure, but I just find that to be kind of an interesting thing, that there's this huge feast that's happening and they're headed that direction, but yet they're stopping to listen to Jesus. As we continue on, it says this in verse 5. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Now, if you've heard, again, we're talking about the feeding of the 5,000. We're about to get to that point. If you've heard the story before, you've probably heard some emphasis on the idea that God takes our small amount, those fishes and loaves, and he distributes them and makes a miracle happen. Anybody ever heard that portion of this story be taught, right? You might even see it on a bumper sticker, fishes and loaves, right? Fishes and loaves, people, that's all we need. God's going to do the miracle. He's going to make it work. Fishes and loaves. It's a beautiful part of the story. It's an awesome detail, and I do not disagree with that teaching in any way. But in my opinion, verses 5 and 6 right here are actually the point, the main point that Jesus is trying to communicate to us in this story. And here is why I believe that. I want you just for a second just to put yourself in Philip's shoes here. There's a sea of people in front of you, thousands of people. And Jesus tells you to go get something for them to eat, knowing that you don't have the resources to do so. That there is an impossible task that's being laid in front of you by your teacher, the one that you're following, your master, right? And you may have heard someone say before, go back to kind of present day you, that God doesn't give you more than you can handle, or God would never give you more than you can handle. And as I look at this story, I'm like, well, maybe he gives you so much that you can handle that you actually have to rely on him to do so. That there might be a task set in front of you that feels like it's impossible, that feels overwhelming, that feels like in your own strength and understanding you are incapable of. And yet it's an opportunity for you to lean into what God might actually be able to do through you, through his own miraculous work and understanding. Now, I'm curious, why do you think, and this is not necessarily a response, but just something for you to consider, why would Jesus ask his disciple to do an impossible task? Why would Jesus ask his disciple to do an impossible task? Seems kind of unfair. And I think we get the answer actually in verse 6, and that is to test him, because he knew for himself, he knew what he would do. Now, that idea of Jesus testing one of his disciples might be a little uncomfortable for you. The idea that he might be tested, and therefore, if you've already come to this conclusion, would God maybe then ultimately test you as well? Let me put it this way. If Jesus tested Philip, is it possible God could test you also? If Jesus tested Philip, is it possible God could test you also? I think we have a slide here, Tori, for that as well, just in case just to kind of lock that in. Now, I don't have time to go down the trail of, where does the Bible say that God tests people or anything like that, but if you want to write these down, circle back to them later. Here's 3 verses about that kind of outline the idea of God testing his people. So James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, 1 Thessalonians 2:4, and 1 Peter 6:7. James 1, 2 and 3, 1 Thessalonians 2:4, and 1 Peter 1, 6 and 7. Now, I think one thing I want to point out here is that a test is not necessarily a bad thing. And I think sometimes we just assume, or we hear the word test, and it has kind of a negative connotation to it. I don't know if it's our education system, that we're just like anxiety about tests, or that the idea of that you might fail it comes up, and then that creates some negative feeling towards it. But I want to make the case, at least this morning, that I don't think a test is necessarily a bad thing, or should be thought of as a bad thing. In fact, I would just say generally a test is strictly just used to evaluate, do you have the skill and understanding that is required of you? Do you have the skill and understanding that is required of you? And if you don't, that's okay. That just reveals to you that that's where you're at. I'll tell you a quick story to kind of paint the picture here. So when I was in high school, I remember it was like a playground. It's kind of like a child's playground, but like somewhat bigger, and I was with some friends, and we had climbed up to like the very top of it, like not like on the playground equipment itself, like on the roof of the equipment, right? Like 15, 20 feet in the air. And from the ground, when we were talking about doing this, I was 100% confident that I could climb up there and jump off and be completely fine. I was like 16, okay? And we get up there, and I realized I'm standing up here, I'm like, I think, you know what? Yeah, I can do this. Even from the ground I thought I could, from up there I thought I could. I've still got this. And then the 2 friends that I was with jumped off, and they didn't just land on their feet. They kind of landed and rolled. And there's like a technique to that you're supposed to learn to be able to jump from higher places. I don't know if you're aware of this or not. But I realized standing up there by myself that I didn't have that skill. I didn't know how to do that. And I hit this moment of realization where I'm like starting to see the future play out. You ever have this moment? And I'm like, I picture myself in crutches. I'm picturing myself with a cast from like the waist down, right? From this jump. I can picture the exact moment flailing my arms through the air. And when I realize this was a terrible idea, you should not have jumped. You didn't have the skill and the understanding required in order to do this safely, even though like I watched other people do it. And I put this in front of you. I explain this just to say that moment, even though I was 100% confident that I could do it on the ground and even standing up there for the briefest of moments, I realized that I did not have the skill and the knowledge required in order to complete that task. It was probably a good thing that I didn't try it. So whether, the pass-fail thing didn't really come into play. It just told me that I did not have what I needed in order to do this. It was a reevaluation moment to understand, even though I thought completely confident that I could do this, when the moment came, when the test came, I realized I didn't have what I needed to do this. And in that instance, I don't think the test is bad. I think it's just an opportunity for us to recognize, am I actually where I thought I was? And I think this is the kind of test that we're seeing here, is it's not necessarily that you're wrong or that you should be ashamed if there's a moment where your faith is put to the test and you don't necessarily follow through with what you feel like God's leading you to. But it's an opportunity to recognize, oh, maybe I'm not where I thought I was. Maybe my beliefs, maybe they're not as strong as I was hoping that they were. Like I thought that I had more faith in this, but maybe I need to dig back into the scriptures. I need to go back to prayer and Jesus and ask him to increase my faith, to understand, to give me more opportunities to grow. Like that's not a bad thing. It's just a recognition. It's a self test or to know, am I where I think I am or not? I'll say this last note about this verse before we go any further, because I do really appreciate this about Jesus. I love how Jesus invites Philip into the solution, even though he already knows what he's going to do. Like, it's just very cool to me. I think, one, it's a great leadership principle to know that you can invite someone else into the solution, even if you have kind of an idea in your mind of how you want to do it. But also, it's a reminder that God wants to partner with us. Like, how crazy is it that Jesus is like, I'm going to feed these people no matter what. I've got this. I know what I need to do. But Philip, hey, how about you take a crack at it? Why don't you, let's see what you come up with, how you would do this. He invites them into it. And I'll put it this way, that God is going to accomplish his goals with or without us in this world. Yet he invites us to participate. And I don't know about you, but I think that's just an amazing truth. He's going to accomplish his goals with or without you. But he invites you to participate. Let's keep reading and see how Philip responds to the test from Jesus. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many? So Jesus has offered Philip this impossible task, and Philip responds in a very reasonable and logical way. Look, 200 denarii, so denarii is about a day's wage. 200 days of work, like the wages of that, wouldn't cover even enough for everybody to have a bite. We could probably work for an entire year and everybody's not going to be filled, right? And so he comes back to Jesus with this, he's been given this impossible task, and yet he responds in a very reasonable, logical way. And then Andrew, God bless him, comes up and he's like, well, this kid over here's got some food. It's probably not enough. I don't know how we're going to make this work, but he's got a couple of loaves and some fish. And, I will say, to Andrew's credit, at least he offers some kind of solution instead of just complaining. But it's this realization moment where we see how inadequate the resources that they have are to fulfill this task. And I know I've already said this, but there are moments in our lives when we may either find, just through the circumstances of life or from something that feels like God's leading us to, that we feel completely inadequate for the task that's been put in front of us. And I think the lesson, one of the lessons from this, is to recognize, where do I go in those moments? Do I jump to how I can logically, reasonably find a solution to this? Or do I recognize that there's actually an opportunity to lean in faith and to see God do something that my worldview would tell me is impossible, but I believe that God is capable of the impossible? So I think the point of this test is not for Jesus to expect Philip to logically, reasonably think out how he's going to collect enough money to buy enough bread to feed these people. The idea is that he's going to recognize that Jesus is capable of far more than what his worldview all his life has told him, so that he can lean in through faith. One thing that I struggled with as a young pastor or in ministry, I'd often get into situations like this where I don't know what the answer is. And sometimes I would go to somebody and be like, I feel like the faithful decision is this, or this feels kind of impossible, but this is what I feel like I'm supposed to do. And there would be like a response of like, well, but like God gave you a brain, so like use your brain. Like, what's the smart choice, right? I don't know if any of you have ever been told that. And I don't want to this is not an attack or shot at anybody that says that or anything like that. Maybe you feel that way. Maybe you agree with that. But I would say this, as I read through the life of Jesus, I don't think you can come to the conclusion that Jesus, in his life, would value logic over faith. I don't think you can come to that conclusion based off of the life of Jesus, and even specifically in this story, what he's asking Philip here. He's not asking Philip to come up with the logical, reasonable answer, even though that's what Philip gives him, and oftentimes that's what our response is. He wants him to come to the faith answer, the option that's going to actually require him to lean into who Jesus is and a different understanding of the world than what he's grown up with. And I'll put it like this again. I think this is important for us to recognize, and maybe a worldview shift for you, is that as followers of Jesus, most of the challenges we face in life are not tests of logic; they are tests of faith. Most of the challenges that we face are not tests of logic; they are tests of faith. And oftentimes we want to, because of the way we grow up, the way our culture is, it's like the first response is, how can I think my way through this? How can I come to a logical, reasonable answer? What's the smart thing to do? What's the wise thing to do? And again, I'm not saying that there's something wrong with trying to be wise. Obviously, that's not the point of what I'm trying to say, right? The point is that we can lean into the idea of what is faith asking me to do at this moment, alongside of what is my brain, what am I thinking, what's the logic tell me? So let me get some caveats, because I don't want anybody to hear this again and go like, okay, I'm going to go jump out of a plane with no parachute because I've got faith and God's going to save me, right? Like, that's not the point that I'm trying to get to. So 3 quick caveats. Yes, God did give you a brain and you should use it. Let's just be clear about that. But above thinking, we should also pray. Yes, faith and logic can often and do often agree with each other. The faithful choice is often the logical choice. And yes, there are many times when you may pray about something and God may not give you a clear answer. And so the best thing that you have to go off of is just what your reasoning, your logic, your instincts tell you. Those are all truths that we can agree on. But here's my encouragement to you from there, is first to consider for yourself, what is your first response when you're faced with a challenge? Is it to think your way through or to trust your way through? Is it that I want to logically reason my way through this, or that I want to go in prayer to God and see how can I faithfully approach this situation? The second is this, is what would it look like for me to trust Jesus or God through this, whatever I'm currently facing, instead of thinking my way through it? So what's my first instinct? And then how can I shift that to where I'm actually approaching this in faith instead of just in a logical, reasonable way? And I'll say this too, because you might be thinking like, there's nothing going on right now that seems like it's requiring faith. I'm not sure how to apply this per se right now. And I would say this, again, 32 years old, I'm been here long enough to recognize that if there's nothing going on right now, you don't have to wait very long. It's coming for you. Like, I'm not wishing it upon you, but most likely, you've been on planet Earth long enough, it's coming for you. And the second thing, though, as well, and this might be the one that is a little more difficult, is it possible that you're just so used to going the logical route that you don't actually recognize that there might be a faith solution more often than you think so right now? Like, is it maybe not that it has to be the world caving in on you that requires a faith solution, but even more of the mundane day-to-day stuff that you just could approach with faith as opposed to just what's the logical thing to do? Even something as simple as, where am I going to eat lunch today? Oh, God, what is there a place that you've prepared for me that I might encounter someone and have a spiritual conversation and get to share my life with you and with them? And I don't know. But I think there's far more opportunities for us to include faith in our life when we oftentimes just jump to what's the reasonable thing to do. I think Jesus had a deep desire for his disciples to be people of faith and not just conventional wisdom. But don't worry, because even though Philip may not have passed this test, he gets a front row seat to see how Jesus solves it anyway. So let's pick back up in verse 10. Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the barley loaves left by those who had eaten. Now, another reason that I love that this story is in all four Gospels is you think about the number of people. So it says 5,000, but most people think that that's just referring to the men. Like, we're talking probably, if you include women and children, maybe 10,000 plus people here that are being fed. And I think about four different people writing this down in this wildly popular historical document that's supposed to document the life of the Savior of the world. That's a lot of people to be able to debunk this miracle, to say, I was there, not actually what happened, right? And yet we don't have any accounts of that. And so I love that all four of them say this, that happened, and we don't have evidence of it being denied. And I also love that through his miracles, we get to witness Jesus provide for us, and in this miracle specifically, get to provide in a way that actually rewrites the sin that entered into the world in the garden. This is something I'm super excited about. I love this moment. In Genesis chapter 3, verses 17 through 19, it says this. To Adam he said, "Because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return." I read this and I recognize, like, Jesus didn't break a sweat passing out this food. There was not a struggle happening here. There is a moment of reset that Jesus is embodying here of, this is not how I'm going to accumulate the food and the resources that you need. Like, I can make it happen without having to go through this challenge and sweat and toil that has been placed upon you because of the sin that has entered the world. It's a reset kind of moment of going back to the garden for a minute where there's this abundance happening that does not need to be strived for. Not only that, it says that, he says he gave bread and fish as much as they wanted. He's not just simply rationing out just like the minimum that they could eat and stay sustained, right? This isn't just you get enough to eat for today. It was everyone gets as much as they wanted and then some. There's 12 baskets left over. Like, we believe in a God of abundance, not of scarcity. Not just that, hey, he did this miracle where he feeds thousands of people, but there's enough for them to eat as much as they want, and there's still some left over. There's always enough in the kingdom of heaven. Let's finish up with this last section here, the last couple of verses. It says, when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. I mentioned earlier that the people didn't really get who Jesus was fully, or at least it seems like that by the evidence. They recognize him as a prophet and they want to make him king. Now, at face value, that doesn't sound so bad. Yeah, Jesus is king, right? Like, that is ultimately what he's going to do. But they believe he's come to give them a physical liberation, they recognize an impossible mountain in front of them, but not the one that Jesus came to remove from them. They see him as offering freedom and restoration, but freedom and restoration from Rome and a restoration to power on the national level, as opposed to freedom from the judgment of their sin and restoration of their relationship with their God. There's a missing recognition here, and that's why Jesus doesn't say, yeah, please come, take me. I'm going to go off and be king now. It's, no, you still don't get it. I need more time here. I need more time with you. I'm going to retreat so that doesn't happen. Now, as we kind of come to a close in our time, I want to invite Evan to come back up. And I want to end with this idea of, I want to ask you to do something that might seem impossible, actually. We've been talking about this idea of maybe God asking you to do something impossible. This might seem impossible. My hope and desire for you as one of your pastors is that you would get this lesson faster than Jesus' disciples did. That's the part that might sound impossible or a little crazy. I mentioned that this miracle happens in all four Gospels, and in Mark's Gospel, it actually happens in chapter 6 as well, like in John's. But if you flip over to chapter 8, this is what we read. During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance. His disciples answered, but where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them? I read this and I'm like, I don't know how much time has passed between these two chapters, but there's thousands of people that need to eat. We don't have any food to feed them. I've seen this movie before. I know what happened. I know the outcome of this. And yet when we read the disciples' response, I'm like, how did you still haven't gotten it? And yet, like, I think about that as I reflect, and I'm like, okay, so I'm looking at this through hindsight, through my understanding of, like, I know how this ends. And I recognize it hits me like, how often do I play this same role? Where when I look back at my life, I see that God has been incredibly gracious and generous to me. I've seen him do things that my brain would tell me are impossible, and yet I've seen it come to fruition. I've seen how God can work, and as a sinner saved by grace, I am a walking miracle like you are. That there is resurrection power that would raise me from the dead at some point when Jesus returns. And yet, when the mountain rises in front of me, when I feel overwhelmed by life, when there's a challenge that seems impossible in front of me, is my first response to go to my logical, reasonable side? I just don't think I have the resources to do this right now. Or is it to believe in the God of miracles who goes far beyond what my understanding of how the world works and has so much more at his disposal than what I do to be able to come through in those impossible moments? So I'd encourage you, whether it's a huge moment in your life that it does feel like there's this mountain in front of you that you just can't move, you feel powerless, or it's more mundane, day-to-day things, to invite faith into your decision-making process as much as you possibly can. And again, it's not wrong to use your brain and to be logical and reasonable, but that Jesus came and lived his life in a way that was filled with faith, doing the impossible and putting on display for his disciples, the ones that lived with him and walked with him, that this is the way I want you to view the world. It's different than how you grew up. It's different than how you were taught. It's different than what you've experienced so far. I've got a new way. And years went by, and they're still challenged to, in the moment, come up with that same response of faith, of leaning into the impossible, of the miracle. And so for you, maybe it's like, maybe the encouragement is just like, hey, look, they lived with Jesus for years and still didn't get it. So, hey, you're doing all right. It's going to be okay. Maybe you feel like I've missed it a few times, maybe a lot of times. That's okay. There's going to be another test. There's going to be another opportunity for you to lean into faith. And it might be a time that you realize I don't have the understanding and the skill that I thought I did. It's an opportunity for you to grow. It's an opportunity to recognize where you're at. How can I move forward? How can I get to the place where the next time I'm faced with this opportunity, I'll choose the decision of faith. Would you pray with me? God, thank you so much for your word. Thank you so much for the life of Jesus. Thank you for the opportunity that we have in front of us to respond to the situations and trials and tribulations of life in faith, knowing that we serve a God who can do the impossible, as opposed to just having to logic and reason our way through it. I think about this, even, no matter how capable you might feel like you are, it's an overwhelming task to think that you need to come up with the solution to every problem in your life. And I pray that we would recognize as followers of Jesus that we have the faith route in front of us. That the problems that we face are not meant for us to just think our way through, but to trust you through in the midst of them. Father, we love you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.